Chapter 3 The Accident to Ruin It All, Poplar Tree. The slums were like a winter wonderland of ash. Pipes of powder along road edges of this close-knit communities of constructed housing, like boxes upon boxes of metal, wood, and concrete. Farm animals like chickens, feces, puddles of dirty water. Feral dogs, birds, and rats, children running in packs, all contained around the working industrial zone situated closest to the water. From the hills, walking in place seemed to envelop a large portion of the lake. Docks with homes connecting to the larger construction of living spaces all stacked upon each other like a colony of bees with their continuously growing nest. Beautiful in an impressive way, thus so much chaos can be tamed in a functioning island of civilization. The ash didn't rain, but it collected as soot upon the ground and sides of the industrial tenement housing situated behind the working district. They are mostly converted buildings, ancient, well-constructed members of the old city, mostly newly fixed, casting in concrete, nearly unrecognizable. At the center was an old church, gorgeous stonework blessed against the laws of time, a layer of decay encrusting the architectural masterpiece. Brutalist Gothic with crosses bearing electricity, infinite wires extending from the plethora of metal, extending from each possible point upon roof tip, crosses upon crosses. The original ornate cross, built with the original structure, untouched by any wiring. Wires extended as another blanket to all points of the city upon poles, cross roofs, up buildings, frames or complete structures. They created a web of electricity extending to every point of the city, and any below the ominous cross of the old gray stone church, an entirely filling, disgusting display of power. The hills surrounding the town were used for the farming of subterranean vegetables, garlic, potatoes, and beets in divots, orchards in the hills, high hills, vineyards in the steep slopes, grants for the few flat sections, creeks and small rivers converted into aqueducts, supplying water to the farms of the valley. The crater was a hidden metropolis, and situated on the far peaks were the governing statues surrounding government buildings, military castles of walls, fences and structures extending around crater's edge, meeting at the roadway at the pass. A real metropolis of poison, carried from the ground up smoking pillars. Thermal vents only microorganisms could survive under at depth's bottom. In a sea of wires, a single trolley cable car, hidden at bottom by city, jutting cables into line to governing buildings below mountaintop. Where we were headed, we would be taking the cable car to the far peak. With roads and trails winding everywhere, it felt important taking the primary roadway in. Parked armed service vehicles, vehicles at the pass, a hidden road existed around the bowl's edge, created where the trees covered. They took the mountain perimeter. As we walked in, sightseeing, the last breath of civilization, inhaling the increasingly toxic air, only speaking of the city. The last 1,000 steps for the 7-day journey. A final selection, we stopped, interacting with the farm workers, dissecting grapes off vineyard leaves. They were happy to see travelers. The interaction was brief. Do you have any idea how to reach the gondola station? I had no idea what a gondola was. No, you would have an easier time asking somewhere closer, somewhere in town somewhere, closer to the station or whatever it's connected to. A conversationalist. Another worker spoke out besides the farm worker, with a tan shirt, obscure, high hat and strapped overalls. You just take the double-lane road through town, the one you're walking on. Never turn off. These people's minds had been sun-bleached. They spoke in fraction. This one's face was skewed by nearly 45 degrees on her head. Her lips and eyelids tinted yellow. Her teeth and sclera were obtusely white. A pure life of hard farm labor was in effect. I saw the strings attached to her, a dream up in the air. She had turned into a marionette, probably since she was a teenager. The fairy in her head had corrupted her, raising out her back with strings attached. She wanted to sink into the earth, while the pixie desired to fly away, only a death with the strings cut. The pixie was doing the real work, pulling the strings, taking the feeling of constant damage from her body.
She got the better of the two deals, the feeling of finally floating off. I refused another glance to the youthful woman. Invisible cables pulled her shoulders, the major support strings keeping her upright. Gary opened his mouth. This makes sense. Thank you for the help. Gary wasn't present. The workers readjusted sideways, back into their working positions, lowered down crouching, extending their arms, a master puppeteer working her fingers, an automatic rifle to plucking grapes. I never questioned anything about the job, a strange feeling that my partners worked for the government. I was assured briefly by the contract. Sand Dollars Company was a Beverly institution. They were set up deep within the upper slums district. They even had electricity, fans and everything keeping them cool, a mystery hiring outsiders. A single rail line between outskirts of rail civilizations of villages still existed. Behind the government buildings, a mountain base situated with two prehistoric mining towns.
A single rail car had been set up to travel between the two towns. Originally functional, retired to a tourist photo opportunity, refurbished to pull railway sleds between towns. They carried various goods, mostly raw materials and metal. Both mines had been closed. They existed as tourist towns, reopening for mining after restituting the towns. The mines after the towns were resituated, opening with railway restoration, prior only briefly to the official resettlement of the town and opening of the mines. The further town mined tin and copper as well. The closer found aluminum and copper. A plethora of iron was contained in both mines. These buildings were ancient and well constructed. They lasted with little upkeep. Apparently the farther town had never been abandoned, closer to the farms of foothills and an archive of history. Generations of achievement the town managed through, forgotten in time. Bert and Beverly's journey was a loop. Descending the mountain behind the government, they first recruited at the steep mining town, where they picked up Gary and Joshua. They took the single locomotive situated as the conductor's chambers to the foothills, where they found Mary, Sasha, and Sue. Sasha and Sue were originally Eastern European, both male. Mary sounded like a her name. Local miners, they were happy to find other work. Sometimes they found difficulties breathing while walking. Each person was hired during purchase approach at local pubs. Even after a 7-day journey, I was only familiarized with Bradley and Becky. I knew names and was familiar with personalities, skills, and weaknesses, but not background. They never spoke of themselves after. I was reluctant to give up my own facts. First stopping at a local diner by their offices. We were early, not scheduled to be in until this evening. We have time to spend. My nose became increasingly sour the closer we got to center mass. We approached the water, lake jutting away in our direction from the slums. I noticed the dozens of people freely using the restroom at water's edge. They would bury the excrement. The water is polluted like a paint palette. Gray in sections, orange, yellow, red, brown, purple, and pink. Various industrial runoffs spewing colored liquid. Latrine buildings off docks. From a distance, the water was obviously dirty, but nothing appeared this shocking. One section coated in oil had caught fire far down in the industrial section. Tiny workers observed nervously from elevated cement shores. A complete mystery how they obtained clean water till I asked Beverly. She explained that the water was semi-luxurious for some people. Often they would send their children to fetch buckets full from the mouth of the inflowing stream, as I suspected. The tubes of the same mouth carried water to the industrial work using selection. One of them was brought a boiler where steam was used to create purified water for the workers to drink. Another tube brought water to public wells at the divide between the living and working districts. It traveled through pipes under the workers' feet to the well, constantly spewing water. This was always crowded with multitudes of people, crowding around to try and get their turn. I pondered why they didn't split into one faucet, a multiple. Apparently, the water pressure wasn't great enough, so poor children were tasked with hand collecting. Anyone situated on the slopes collected their water from the streams. The government had large aquifers. The slum district was like a wall into another world. First the noise consumes you after passing your first home, and wandering chicken, you become part of the rat's nest. You start moving like a rat, hugging walls, jittery, bearing part of the collective. You become used to the sensory overload. Everyone does what they need and they won't stop at nothing to do so. Controlled chaos. Everyone pursues their functional goal and attempts at a perfect efficiency. As to avoid falling behind into failure.
If you don't swim, you sink. The street selections of the lower district section was full of vendors, merchant workers, and a plethora of shoppers. The business selection of town, the downtown region. Chickens in cages, chickens loose, dogs running in a pack, rich charms like teeth and shrunken animals turned into jewelry. I glanced at the charms and my eyes carried to the gutter, over where a couple was engaging in intercourse. They looked at me and had pig snouts and hawk eyes. She was holding my hand and let go for a moment to smile and wave towards them. I skipped out of space until we found a quainter section. Middleborough residential neighborhood, lying incline up to where they found a quieter section. Middleborough's residential neighborhood along an incline up to where many contractor offices were located. I continued noticing strange people in this section. They had charms, tattoos, and piercings. In another life, I would be one of them. Luckily, I was hidden up in the safety of the woodland life. They were oozing with power and huddled in packs, throwing up hand gestures and making strange faces. No one else besides me noticed. They rarely spoke and only watched. Later, I would question who these people were, and Bert would explain they worked for the church. They would never admit it, but they held those up from the darkness. Bert was wise sometimes, alert, clueless with deeper intentions. These groups of charmers would be stationed where the power lines connected. Being on an incline, it was easier for the cables to be sectioned out. Many connected from the air poles to larger buildings to dispersing the smaller cords to various places. Usually these smaller cords would break away, further connecting after to a residential chunk. The massive structures supporting various homes and businesses, then breaking again, providing a power line to any resident who gave enough back to have electricity.
String lights coated the diner. Recycled dark glass windows. Real uppity. Close to their offices. Once we settled in, Beverly explained briefly that those people who had the clubhouse nearby, which explained why many of them were collected in these parts. She mentioned it so casually and near ghostly, like she was talking back to herself, that I knew she wanted to avoid the subject. I ordered eggs and chicken. Came with potatoes and pickled beet mashed toppings. It was outstanding and expensive. After eating, I would step out. Everyone was happy and content. I had forgotten the smell until I began eating. Although in a respectably clean and fresh environment, the leached air of industrial fumes and various wastes, along with considerably gourmet kitchen fumes, had set me dizzy. I wanted to find something to smoke, so I set off walking along a strip of businesses neighboring the restaurant. General stores, supply center, open window food dispensaries, building contracting office space, artifact antique shop, classier witch hut shoppery with stabler items for home furnishing and display, and finally an alley. I spotted a slot in the sink of a structure, a single layer of wood missing in a rectangular shape, with a mass of thick wires climbing over each other poured out. I followed them along the ground a ways, multicolored with smaller wires entangled, and a larger, like a mass of vines, into an alley door. I peered inside into a single-room opium den. Incense and candles burned dimly, illuminated the windowless room. A single well-preserved ornate chandelier hung from center ceiling. Both benches around tables with fabulous ash columns and centers. Pillow seating. I followed the wires around the wood frame corner, along the wall and behind a counter, selling concoctions of various sorts in old fridges, fronts, cupboards, replaced with glass, along with other non-food consumables. Exactly what I was looking for. I followed the wires and they did lead me astray. In their den, the club members stared as I approached the counter, minding my own business. Along the counter walls were smokables. I bought cigarettes, more costly than alcohol from import expenses. The wire was now hidden. I picked an empty booth, taking refuge. Finally, some time alone. The smell of opium and scented burnables was nice, as the smoke in the air was dimly lit in the atmosphere. I lit up the first of my pack of 16. Glancing around the room, everyone saw, still staring at me. Still on my nomadic high, I wasn't turned into the hostility. The full belly and nicotine were helping either. Relaxed, the cultists finally dropped their attention and stiffened. All sitting straight, heads forward and level. They refused to move. Their faces bent in with discomfort and pain, refusing to move positions. They were self-harming by sitting, hurting their grundles, each of them, in the same positioning. Grundles digging into their spots, delivering the constant pain they wore on their face. All-powerful, I was mesmerized. The chandelier swaying slightly caught my attention. I raised to the head level with the object watching hypnotized. Distracted by the slight back and forth of the chandelier, the bartender approached me with my back turned. Reaching over the booth, they brought an unopened bottle of wine down on the back of my head. He must have been experienced because he hit me to break the bottle in such a way where the heavy glass took most of the brute force, along with the base end of the neck. I was concussed and immediately knocked unconscious. When I awoke, I was being pulled by a donkey-drawn cart up an incline under a decayed concrete building. The smell of industrial fire sent me into a blistering fit of coughing. Joshua was pissed off, but I didn't care. I could barely talk. My eyes on the functional member of my body, I watched Disney as a demon-formed bull push someone from a tenement window. They dropped 13 floors before hitting the ground with a slight splatter. People, especially the woman in my group, let out screams. I could tell they were antsy for some reason to come, and the devil didn't disappoint putting on a nice show. Workers with red eyes quickly removed the body and tossed it into an open incinerator, fueling industrial machinery, and open factory next to the building. We were on the edge of the industrial district, at this point by the old concrete ceiling buildings refurbished as tenement housing for the workers. The floor workers were gray-skinned and all missing. All aspects of themselves. Their sense, blood, heart, body, and soul were missing. The workers with jobs that required constant movement, managerial delivery drivers, were all outfitted with body-coating jumpers and heavy industrial respirators overhead. A clear division of misrepresentation deciding who was expendable and who wasn't. I passed out again. I reawoke at night when we arrived at the mansion on the mountain top dark. The place was illuminated with spotlights from the ground. I looked to see the back of 5 structures, sculptures from the stone of man, 5 times the size of a man in robes, partially religious seeming and intimidating. You could almost see them in their forms from the backside city, appearing as frozen ant people who overlooked the place, or so I was told by second hand. They mentioned the place to go was behind the statues in the original instructions. When the Sand Dollar Company was first hired, I couldn't tell their intentions as frozen objects. No poses, just arms dripping and covered by robes, like children with coat sleeves extending over their heads. Aloof almost, they set the mood for the entire place. Disgusting almost, like any powerful structure. I barely noticed how upset she was during earlier moment of consciousness. I had reawoken to see the man die, unconscious and tuned with disastrous events. The darkness couldn't resist the show. I briefly observed the factories in use, the hefty cast iron, a long assembly out into the pavement casted out outer lawn of warehouses containing storage and lift drivers, moving crates of materials and finishing products ready to be shipped anywhere or redistributed to the city. The machinery slamming, burning, bending, or otherwise functioning to assemble parts human hands can do by themselves. Workers at stations to slightly adjust the position of parts or doing minuscule additions of materials. The fine-tuning and assembly no industrial machine could do, only the steady, acute motor skills of the human hand. These machines and belts, rails, out in the open actually slightly hidden, askew by fencing ran in straight lines or curled around in fencing area with enough distance between each other, curved for large vehicles to move through. The workers emulating the machines of assembly lines, they were part of the industrial complex. Souls entombed in the machines, their bodies as extension. Anyway, she hadn't noticed my arousal until I was already back under. Only Gary noticed with his disapproving look. He was the one tasked with pulling my car after all. She was too busy screaming at the carnage of the suicide to pay attention to me. In the looking I noticed she was a complete wreck. Face bloated and swollen red from bawling. Worried sick, she almost exploded when she noticed my eyes open. My ears must be processing, even when asleep, as I woke up to another opportune moment as I gathered trying to decide what to do with me. She was all over me until Bert called her off. I wasn't responding to her, barely processing anything. A practical fever dream of consciousness, I sat there a baby in a wagon cradle. Her arms went flaccid as she realized she was only adding more stress on my bloated brain. Sasha and Sue both had medical training and were contemplating drilling a hole in the side of my head to release pressure. A nervous wreck, looking all around, trying to decide whether to let them or to not. They decided with their safety in mind over my life to leave me undrilled so long as I remained conscious. Stiff guards desperate to move, their dog bodies so ready to lash out at any second, eyeing us down with their noses head high on the other side of the entrance doorway. A big arc above, they seemed to be concerned, but accept only intimidation. They agreed she would stay with me while they met with the 5 seats of power, the pentarchy. They nursed me with enough water to help decrease the swelling some, then approached the entrance. The mansion itself was half hexagonal shape,
as if you split a hexagon along the corners, with the front edge of the entryway sitting at the concave inside. She focused all attention upon me and walked away, eyes intent trying to conjure what her next move would be. A nice hedge garden around two identical ponds on either side of the path leading to the entrance. I wonder if the pond would have fish. As the guard led out our pneumatic traveling band into the mansion walls, a small box stood around the edge of the hedge and stopped at the gate. The guards closed the doors behind our company and turned around to stare at the little turtle, with mouths open and mirroring the turtle. One guard broke down crying like he had just witnessed the end of the world, their personal world or otherwise. Like being rescued by a superhero who broke down the walls, the second guard jumped to save the day, bounding towards the turtle, eyes flashing the dance of the devil. Smashing the box turtle, bringing his foot down upon its 6 square inch back, annihilating the creature. Like a scene set up by God, the figure's positioned mouth open in their natural form, body erect and play button push, disgusting display of power. A brief pause before the guards loosened up and stood completely naturally before returning to their positions. The pressure released from their bodies, the tension excreting from their faces, and the previous forms has exited. All the while, she stared at me, speaking some. Although nearly frozen as the events plays out, back turned to somehow failed to notice. Was she deaf? Probably. I stared at the broken turtle, upper back smashed, shattered like glass, pressed into the earth. Its head crushed into the fine called the pavement, smashed into the ground, forced to swallow pavement. I passed out again and moments later to hear the noise she was making, smacking my face, moving my head back and forth, with each hand smacking my cheeks, although I failed to notice any pain or feeling or touch sensation at all. Desperately calling my name over and over again, trying to keep me conscious. It worked. The muscle sounds effective. I could only feel the right side of my face and neck and right arm too, the feeling bulging enough to be uncomfortable. The nerves stiff and in shock, the feeling not painful but in tension holding. I lay there in shock. She started crying again, and the line of thought breaking down the world was missing from my body. My eyes and windows, I observed her freak out, catatonic. She continued, checking my vitals and observing me for 10 minutes before guards and doctors with their nurses left the building. Our group had informed the high-up overseer of my condition and had sent them no questions asked. The medical professionals rushed immediately and fetched a stretcher for me to leave on before a medical vehicle escorted me to a medical building along with the road hidden behind the buildings along the flat ridgelines. In the ambulance, they hooked me up to saline and noticed my bulging right eye. It looked like it was about to burst or pop out of its socket. The swelling had put enough pressure on my sinuses along the eye to bug it out. They put ice on and told me to keep it there, updated on my condition. I remained completely unresponsive. From my perspective, I was completely sightless. I could feel the same sensations on my body, a nervous fixation on my far right side of my face and neck, including my eye. The feeling extended as a line down the top of my right arm, from my neck to my shoulder, down my right hand. Most intense along this line, with the feeling extended from line wrapping my arm. Almost like tendrils, like the nerves on the surface of my arm and neck extending to my face and squeezing my eye out. More like veins, like my veins were swelling, visible and red. I could hear words, but words weren't clear, like I was behind a wall in an endless arid space outside my world, in my own empty reality. Once in the emergency room, they put me under and decided to drill a hole in the right temple and another 2 above the crest on the top of my skull, one a few inches above the other. A medical drill, a 1/4-inch drill bit. The swelling would permanently damage my brain if it hadn't already, and heavy-duty anti-inflammatory medication would take at least a half an hour to take full effect, and by that time I'd be dead. So they put the medicine in my saline and drilled away, filling the holes with teeth filling. The same substance is similar with medical glue bandages. I would never lose the increased focus feeling upon those nerves, although with the restoration all feeling and senses after swelling decrease, and with brain recovery, the feeling would be less prominent. The blood vessels in my right eye damaged from the pressure would never return to normal. Forever bloodshot with a single prominent red vein moving from the cornea and poking the iris. I had a little time to recover, the government people leaving for the sea tomorrow, and we would fall behind with their stuff. Curious why they needed a group of contractors to transport their belongings. They have plenty of guards. Maybe they'd be transporting important belongings, specifically important belongings, they didn't otherwise shouldn't be. They needed us so bandoliers couldn't attack them. They would have no reason to stop them if they had nothing of value on them as they traveled, minimizing risk. The only people who would want to stop them would be hired assassins, paid to execute important people, and there weren't many of those. No, most people only wanted to steal things, and out in the borderlands it would be easy ambush any caravan.
We had the dangerous job of transporting their goods, so if anyone were to been Dito ambushed, it would be us. Our heads would be the ones taken off. They left with the 3 vehicles, one situated at back, an armored army vehicle, situated with a fully functional machine gun turret. One of the 5 rode in this one. The other 2 were SUVs with dark tinted glass, large cars like boxy vans. All vehicles painted a matte jet black. After they left, she dragged me out by the wheelchair. They drove to a warehouse to see the vehicles we were working with. The 5 trucks were being loaded with various belongings in their trunks. Would they be moving everything? The whole wardrobe and all? It seemed like it. Moving various belongings, stacking case after case with various belongings in their trunks, each with their own truckload of belongings. Even a semi, a 12-wheeler, with a cargo hold vacuum was being loaded with furniture. This is a big deal. In total, I know it's 5 large trucks, the semi, 3 SUVs, and 2 converted smaller trucks with seating in the trunks. Joshua approached us, smiling to explain everything. Apparently, this would be our monstrous caravan, and while the rest of the other vehicles, these were camouflaged with the environment. No new paint, just dense decay and rust. Original chipping car paint, faded various colors. They were beautiful, Joshua explained. We would drive the cargo truck. Him and Gary would each be driving a smaller truck. Beverly and Bert would be driving the semi. The people who owned the vehicles were out from the coast. They owned a massive old-world scrapyard with various machines and fixed those up for the job. They sent them with local mercenaries, but needed extra drivers. Our lot was meeting with theirs as we spoke. In total, there were 16 of them, 4 mechanics from the remaining vehicles, while the group of 12 mercenaries, serious people, would be protecting us. No visible government involvement would appear mysterious as to any marauders. No one would know how we were transporting high-end government cargo unless we somehow knew of our contract. Gary remained upset with me. He was the one who had bargained for my body. I thought he was overreacting. All I did was go to the place as they handed the corpse over. Unbeknownst to me, I was slumped over the table, bleeding out my ears when he found me. She had got drunk with the rest of the group as they followed, so Gary went out looking for me after a half an hour. He had good city legs and briefly lived in the city, so before he knew the occult would be the first obvious location for a missing person. He knew to look for wires after walking the strip mall looking for me. The only obvious place for a person to find smokes in the nearby area. Peering around the door entrance to the back alley hideout, he saw them all sitting around my incapacitated wine-soaked body, head down bleeding on the table. All cultists completely aloof, like they had forgotten what had happened. The bartender gave the go-ahead and they threw me over his shoulders. Gary was a big guy and could handle moving me the block. I was slumped on the pavement by the place. By midday they had fetched my cart and we left for the mountain top. I owned Gary for rescuing my body, pulling me up the mountain. The cultists had left their mark on me, touching me with one of their deities or something. I was supposed to be driving but said she would take the wheel and I would be the passenger along for the ride. She had a novice driver, but at best, we would be moving at a snail's pace. Less than 15, so it wouldn't matter. 2 days straight up the coast, then we would sleep. We provided an abundance of caffeine pills, what they gave the workers down below for their 16-hour shifts, and would set out in the morning. Beverly and Bert would lead the way, setting the pace, followed by Joshua with the 3 mercenaries sitting at the open back of a semi-truck, 5 cargo trucks, and 3 SUVs. The second smaller truck piloted by Gary, with more mercenaries sitting in the back. I would dream of sitting atop a pile of endlessly stacked cargo, swaying back and forth ready to topple on the back of a trunk. Although the abyss of dark blue on an endlessly dead-ending road, constantly appearing in front and disappearing behind, being created and destroyed as we moved over it, going nowhere, just driving and swaying at the movement of the truck. The first 2 sways were sickening. The tower stuff would surely topple with belongings raining down, but after a while I relaxed. The back and forth, like a baby being rocked in its cradle. Chefs and food workers in their touchness with God, or was it the devil? The mortal's coils was the devil's property, in fact, came from the earth. They were all dead. Those old gods, the new ones, living in ancient electricity that keep the shithole called humanity alive, or by the ocean beneath the surface, where most people derive their lives. Depressing lives for depressed people, but at least they were safe, free from the pain of the wilderness of earth, choosing instead to float above the spawning grounds of something humans potentially lost long ago, the ocean teetering above on the rafts that were. Chapter 4, Healing's Trip, Cleansing's Journey. I ate breakfast before fleeing town, took as many snacks as possible. The place was full of them, especially dried fruits. The chefs prepared them the previous night and left them out for people to consume off the tables. This was the medical ward at night. I rested in my patient room. Fortunately, I didn't get any sleep. I was up and moving by 4 in the morning and like being blessed from heaven for the first time in my life. The workers had left food out from the night before. A small mess hall, really a room, a single dining table with dried fruits and bread, and smoked meats sitting in the open. She woke up after I got my initial filling.
Well, I woke her up at 6:30 in the morning and brought her the food. We stole as much as we could. They probably had more, packing them in hospital bags made from industrial paper, and got in our SUV. Me in the passenger seat and her in the driver's. We left to go meet the rest. We planned for 7:30. The previous night we were given to the SUV to test drive. She was ecstatic at the wheel. Driving was a privilege, an escape we only knew from driving the dying farm tractor. The SUV was entirely packed with fragile goods, too precious to be out in the open truck bed, but the environment was surprisingly relaxed. Packed professionally, they wouldn't shift around, and she enjoyed herself as I watched. Not upset, I couldn't do much. 2 peas in a pod as we drove. I wasn't present as the holes in my head, leaking me, were letting something else in. Something stirred from the roads, tuned in the cement, trying to grab at anything that passed, bi-willingly, desperately, trying to crawl itself from its hole. We stopped once my head really began to hurt. I took an early night to not sleeping at all. Now our fun was over as we drove up to the warehouse lot. The space was wide open. Our team could position itself to the correct order of vehicles we previously decided for the caravan. We were given more snacks by workers through open windows. These ones, grain power bars with honey and cheap nuts. Our waters were full and our bags strapped up top the previous day. I snagged as many painkillers as I could from the medical ward, a bottle's worth, all I could afford without finding trouble, and was ready to leave. Bert pulled up the horn and we were off by the next day, the ocean, or what was technically part of the ocean, the Caspian Sea. Or I think it was the Caspian Sea. The water from the ocean had flooded higher. The earth was wetter and warmer. Water bodies now differed to what I saw on old maps. No discussion. We fell into our position between cargo truck and the other SUV and began to drive as the SUV ahead of us did. The journey would be boring, following the way in which we came, rounding the mountain on the government road first. The pavement was beautiful and the ride was smooth. Once on the dirt road, one final check-in before leaving the pavement. The ride became more bumpy, less pleasant, especially from my head. I would pass the time by staring out the window, observing the familiar scenery we viewed in our journey's end. Once around the lake, we took a separate crossroad rather than continuing towards home, turning right, going up a mountain. Steeper than anything we traversed on our walk in, the wilderness seemed to change to a completely different biome as we climbed, like we were leaving the valley and we existed into a new setting. A part of the land that existed with no large mountain regions blocking the water, where previously we were on the mountainous plateau of rolling hills and valleys. Now climbing up the wall to the other side, one gradual decline exited leading to the water. It was exciting. The climb took an hour drive and the forest almost breached what you could describe as old world alpine, the ones I'd seen from magazine. From the same place I found pictures of various other pictures, like the lakes, oceans, old cities, and whatever else. Libraries and various shelves of books in a house, more of a castle, made of stone and containing a single turret along a hillside. I found it when I first ran from home, back when I barely could be considered a young adult. For my time, I know I looked like a child, and being the size of an adult, I was treated as capable. Unfair by certain standards, but people weren't around anyways. I fled through a nearby pond, and like stepping into a time machine, I climbed up a hill to an old graveled road, what remained of it. I followed the now shod path through an old lot. The house was there, and the old machines scattered, places distributively and purposely, like the world ended during a party, or time stopped for all intimate objects as the people disintegrated away. Like they just got up and left, desperately trying to escape to the woods, leaving everything behind, running from something. Either way, the setup was beautiful, like a nice dreamland. Something I knew familiar from youth, but was swiftly running out of. One of my last prominent somethings I knew familiar for youth, ones as far as I can remember. Others were there most recently for sure, but they were always shared with other people. By those standards, we were less prominently in my mind. Sharing them with something else I lacked processing power for taking everything in, and while nice for the moment, was lasting beauty between people rather than a tranquil moment of brief clarity. For someone whose life was smoke and mirrors, a few things the fog cleared, it was always so nice. Not anymore, not recently. I began to fear leaving the fog, as I'm always left sinking and flipping out to only where my shadow lives. It's a three-dimensional realm where it can observe me as a glowing beacon on the ground. Now I had the better dream life, but their Wykian life must have been blindingly clear. Down in that darkness must be terribly lonely and miserably terrifying. Although, enough time down there in the darkness might have feeling like home, a welcoming, calm place. Boring but safe for someone with certain jurisprudence, not me, but someone similar enough from a different life, myself given the same circumstances. The trees became more deciduous the higher we climbed. Large flat leaves that would fall in for winter. Beautiful golden wood, painless smooth bark that fractured out curling branches, tempting to angle themselves just right, like taking a road to heaven. The air dried some and cooled, no longer crushingly humid, a nice change from what I knew. Unfortunately, this only lasts up to the pass, where the trees are all burned. A forest fire had ruined them recently, only a patch, right up the slope level for a mile, before starting the descent. Moving into the descent, the team becomes more dispersed and evenly spaced. They shared the air instead of climbing over each other.
I struck up a conversation with her as we drove over the pass, about the burnt trees and landscape. Whoa, these look awful. They're all burnt and painful. Must have been a recent fire in the past couple of years or so. Trying to remember if there's been periods of smog. It's mostly just been sunny misery. With her mouth agape like something was squirming from it, like a giant invisible worm, a pause now. This was usual behavior even for her. How am I supposed to respond to that? Before she can answer, I continued. I could probably drive if you really need a break. I offered, even though I had no idea how I could possibly switch with her as the car was moving. We just took the restroom break at the pass. I peed on a burnt tree. The air was strange without any plant life. Interesting at first, but suffocating. By the time I got back in the car, I just hate driving. It's not as bad as when I'm alone, just myself on the road, but driving slowly with my pace set is nearly impossible, especially with you in constant pain next to me. I tried interrupting, but she continued as I opened my mouth. It's like I'm feeding off of it, and it's making me feel awful, but I don't know how to stop. I didn't want to comment. What was she so fucking stupid? What was I putting her through? Hell? Probably. Was it killing her young? Probably. One of us would surely die young, and it sure as fuck wasn't going to be me. No amount of fucking could solve that. Truly a disgrace. Me and her driving through what turned into a desert. Clean salty sand, eventually ocean or sea. With salt water and everything, a trick of the taste buds or mind. What are we going to do after, she asked. Nothing, I replied. See, this is how I communicated when things took a turn and dove under. My head was beginning to bleed again, dripping down my head as we talked. I was so ready to go home, but there was no home. I couldn't escape. She pinned me down, and now we were together, stuck on this closed road with nothing but trees to stare at. My air was foggy and wet and disgusting. I almost hated her was the last thing I projected from my mind at her stupid little face. I caught a glance of myself in the mirror, and the darkness escaped. Not from me, but from her. She reached over and hit my head. I punched her on an arm. In exchange of blows, only I was twice her size. I can see, and she stopped the car. We both played it cool. Unfortunately, for the remainder of the day, she couldn't use her right arm. We were both driving stick, and it was instructed me to switch the gears till I learned to switch based on speed. Working together, we managed to be healthy, like driving partners. For the remainder of the day, things worked well, no talking, just work. We were driving, a safe haven from the disastrous shortcomings of the world around or below us. It would be a while until the demons caught up. The people driving behind us eventually caught up to our antics after honking when we stopped. I was about an hour before they noticed. Sally contacted us through the breaker channel and we were set to. I didn't notice the thing on the running until I heard her voice. And she and Bert were getting sick of our antics. She asked, "Are you two alright?" When we told her there was an abrupt stop there and a lot of odd shuffling, like someone forgot how to drive. I met her in the middle and decided not to lie. I took over the gearbox because her arm was hurting. A brief pause before okay and nothing more. As we left the mountains, the tree became more and more dispersed. The leaves became more round and sharp, like the bark, more flaky. With closer inspection, I could have noticed the trees leaking potent golden sap, but unfortunately we didn't stop. Once down the majority of the incline into the desert valley, the only plants were desert shrubs and cacti. A few dead-looking trees here and there. A couple times the birds perched in the trees, buzzards of some sort. Near water oasis-like settings took root. They looked nice. I haven't noticed divots around many trees, and it seemed like they needed water. Once they may have gone around the water, but small lakes, and in between between a lake and a pond. Now the beds were dry and salt crystals coated the bottom with glassy white surface. The cacti were low to the ground. The shrubs were similar to the trees with mint blue-green, but they could barely be called leaves. They coated the landscape in the valley and were driving through a couple odd farms off roads here and there. It's hard to tell if they were being managed or if someone was still living to take care of the property and growing food. Appearing in the in-between zone right as rigor mortis said, property could die. I could see no life in the houses at a distance, only stagnation. No shuffling or stirring, no lights or shadows, nothing. We continued at a snail's pace and I daydreamed. She looked like she was nearly psychotic. We rarely switched from third gear so I could do whatever I wanted. Although now that we were in the high desert, at least we were being suffocated by wilderness. Wilderness was nice for foot movement, but disappointing while driving. The nature hated the roads breaking the flow of plant life with the asphalts. The plants themselves didn't care. They were individuals who got the space they got, competing with each other for the light and root space. No, it was the earth who cared. The god or goddess. It didn't matter of life itself. That's why it so bothered the strips of black death in its garden. If you would have to tread lightly, while treading over the dead spots, as if you moved too sporadically or unevenly, quick, something would literally reach down and pluck you up. In the same light, if you moved too cautiously, you would get grabbed by the shadow the overseer casts, and pulled down into the ground by something entombed below the pavement. Either way, you would lose if you couldn't move well. If you stood out already moving along the lines which stood out, the ground's wires, you would be hated. If you couldn't tolerate the imperfection of the ground, the annoying lack of trees and forests being cut up by the black strips, and if anything dared to bring anyone any more attention to them than they already drew, they would be destroyed. She was just in the smite of self-destruction being struck behind the car ahead of us. Earlier I caught her eating her food. I prepared the snack from the bags and handed them over. It turned out she was just beginning to self-destruct from dropping under the car from moving too slowly. At a distance from the car ahead of us, it couldn't be from suffocation, but from sinking into the river or dragging up against the ground while flying. I couldn't tell you, but I guessed. I would assume the river, the path was already set. She couldn't swim, so she sunk, consumed herself to breathe. You could just wiggle your left leg at the pace while driving manual. All the pendulums function apart with the vehicle, so you could be disconnected one to just keep rhythm with your heart. So tension build, which led to dissociation, then self-destruction. Adding fuel to the fire to keep going, that would be depressed or miserable, like an actual human fucking person. For some reason, she refused to get herself down or complain, so she instead gave in, and what could initially be considered grooming quickly turned into self-consummation, and destruction, then self-harming with the onset of pain. So now she resisted, body petrified in discomfort, her mind completely missing from her body. The only thing that she did now was occasionally squirm whenever the pain of her soulless body needed to shift. I was in a similar situation, but I wasn't at the wheel, so my body could find that sweet spot and stay out. While driving, the body needed to be situated and alert in a constantly moving position. Driving in a way that could express oneself in a way that allowed for enough body shifting to keep oneself from being entombed in the car seat in a sitting position. That sweet spot that just one could normally find when driving alone on a road with no one else. Where they could just pay attention to the road and themselves interacting with the car. Unfortunately, this wasn't always an option, especially now as we drive along behind someone. I just sat practically on my back with my feet up. You know, at least it had a butt. Practically her body was designed for sitting work, thinking, creating practical things with her hands as she rested on the extra female fat tissue stored in the cheeks resting at the very top of her back legs. The only reason she wasn't in constant pain is because the extra fat tissue was acting as a support cushion for the rest of her body while I was degraded to lying down on the bottom of my back, curling my spine up. It would be horrible for my back if I had to hit all the time, but for now I was comfortable. I needed to be on my feet moving at all times. I was designed for that way with the God-given energy. For now I remain content thinking about the rules of sexual maturation biology, referring to the rules of in-part sedentary, hunter-gatherer societies. I was a natural-born nomad, so I picked up these ideas up as I moved about and observed the difference between myself and others, the difference between myself and the world around me. No home in the world but yours, never not be dangerous place. With no place to rest and let one's guard down so you couldn't let information slip by, and so I observed and studied behavior to stay safe. I studied the moon to everything, not just myself. She could just sit all day as long as the cushion material on her upper legs pushed up against her thighs. I stared not necessarily in jealousy, but in some vicariously on what it must have been like.